The woman stepped off the stage at dusk, the hem of her navy skirt stiff with dust, her throat dry from holding in questions too long. A hawk circled above the livery roof, its wings black against the melting sun. In her gloved hand she clutched a letter, the paper gone soft from rereading, a man's neat, squared script promising hearth and honesty, a cabin near the Wind Fork River, a place to begin again. The ink said his name was Nathaniel Harper. She was to be his wife, but the name called out in the freight yard was a different one, Samuel Harper, and it was said with neither warmth nor welcome. He was taller than she expected, face weather-creased, the color of old leather. A man built like the posts of a cattle fence, straight and unmoved. His hat shadowed his eyes. He didn't offer his hand. "You're late," he said. She felt the words sink, thick as river silt. "I came when the train allowed. You wrote you'd be here first week of May." The train derailed outside Topeka. I walked, took carts, waited near 2 weeks in Elk Grove for the next pass. Samuel shifted his jaw, like that answer did something in him he didn't like. Behind him, the sun died behind cottonwoods, and the yard dogs started to bark. "I'm sorry," she added, quieter. He looked past her to the driver unloading her trunk. "No need to apologize to me. I'm not the one you were bound for." Her throat caught. She hadn't yet spoken the question, hadn't dared let it rise, but now it stood between them. "Nathaniel," she said, "is he?" "Died," Samuel's tone was blunt as bone. 4 weeks back. Took a spill, bringing in a calf caught in the blizzard. Head hit a rock. She closed her eyes just for a moment. The wind had a chill edge, full of dust and something else, burnt wood maybe, or the memory of smoke. "I see," she said, though she didn't not yet. Samuel turned. "Get your things, I've a wagon, it's a ways upriver, storm's likely tonight." She followed without asking more. What could she ask? She had no claim anymore, not to a dead man. Not to his land, not even to her own name, which was now in question. They rode in silence for a time, the wagon creaking as the sun finished falling. She tried to gather her thoughts, to recall exactly what Nathaniel had written. Had he mentioned a brother? She remembered a note about livestock, about repairs to a shed, but no mention of family. Samuel drove with a stern precision. His coat was patched at the elbow, the reins held tight in his calloused hands. He smelled faintly of hay and soap, but beneath that, a coldness like someone who lived too long without conversation. Was it his land? She asked finally low. The homestead, did he have claim? Samuel didn't answer at first. Then, ours. Father deeded it before he passed. Nathaniel stayed. I went west a spell, came back after the war. She nodded, and now. It's mine. That was it, no softening, no apology. Just the facts, handed like a plate of cold beans. They reached the cabin long after the sky had gone to ash. It stood alone among pines, one shutter crooked, chimney leaning a little. A fence ran half-finished toward a collapsed barn. The place looked both lived in and lonely, like a widow who hadn't yet moved the boots by the door. Inside was sparse but clean. A stove, 2 chairs, a table with nicks and scratches like old scars. A bed in the corner, too narrow for comfort. Samuel lit a lamp and motioned toward a cot rolled against the wall. "You can take that. I'll bring in water." She began to speak, maybe to thank him, maybe to ask what now, but he was already out the door. Left alone, she sat on the cot and unpinned her hat. Her hair fell in flattened curls, damp with travel sweat. She looked around, trying to find her place in this sudden life she hadn't meant to live. On the table sat a book, face down, its spine cracked. She turned it gently. Psalms. Inside the cover, in a slanted hand she didn't recognize, was written, "To keep the dark away." She folded her hands in her lap and breathed through the tightness in her chest. She had come west with one truth. She was to marry a man who wanted a wife, not for love, but for companionship, survival, the building of something shared. Now he was gone and she remained. A stranger in another man's home, sheltered but not welcomed. Her name unspoken, her future unread. The door creaked and Samuel entered with the pail. He set it down beside the stove and straightened, then paused. "You got food?" "No," she said. "The last of it went in Elk Grove." He took bread from a tin and sliced it without comment. A jar of beans, cold. He handed her a plate and sat across the table, his eyes not meeting hers. When they ate, it was in the manner of those long used to silence. Every scrape of the fork felt like it carried weight. She chewed slowly, feeling the press of the room's emptiness. Afterward, he stood. "There's two rules," he said. "You work if you stay, and you don't ask for what isn't offered." She met his gaze then. His eyes were the color of storm soil, guarded but not cruel. "I understand," she said. He gave a single nod, then turned toward the narrow bed, boots heavy on the floorboards. She lay on the cot without undressing, hands folded at her chest, and listened to the wind rise in the trees. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called, and the woman who no longer knew what name to answer to closed her eyes and did not cry. By morning, the frost had silvered the grass, and a fox's narrow tracks crossed the yard like a question. She rose before Samuel stirred, pulling on her boots with fingers stiff from cold. The stove had gone out in the night, and her breath clouded the air. In the half-light she moved about quietly, finding a basin, water left in the pail. She washed her face in silence, letting the cold shock her into alertness. When Samuel emerged, dressed and already smelling of cedar smoke and saddle leather, he found her standing at the window, watching the pale smoke of the neighboring ridge rise against the dawn. "I've chores," he said. "If you mean to stay, come." She followed him into the thin sunlight. The barn laned like a drunkard, its boards warped and nailheads rusted. Inside were 3 milk goats, 1 limping, and a sway-backed horse with ribs faintly showing. The animals watched her with patient, hollow eyes. They worked in tandem, though not together. Samuel moved like a man who did not expect help and did not ask for it. She gathered eggs from the coop, careful with her steps among the straw and feathers. Her fingers bled when she split kindling on the stump by the shed, but she said nothing of it. At noon they ate bread and boiled potatoes without speaking. She saw then that his hand trembled slightly when he reached for his cup, and that he favored his right leg as he stood. These were small things, but she noticed them. "You fought," she said, not quite a question. He didn't look up. "Virginia." "Cold Harbor, took a bullet near the hip." She nodded. "My brother died in that battle." That surprised him enough to glance at her. "Union." "Yes, Kansas regiment." His mouth pressed into a line, but he didn't speak against it, nor turn away. The silence that followed was thinner than before. Days passed in rhythm, mornings thick with mist, afternoons brittle with wind. She swept the floors, patched the chimney cloth with an old flannel shirt, and mended the goat's lame hoof with tar and rags. At night, she read psalms aloud in a voice barely above a whisper. The words meant more for the walls than for the man who turned his back on the cot and breathed like he wasn't listening. She learned his habits, the way he counted the fence posts in his head, how he sat with one hand on his belt like he was waiting for a summons that never came. He left for town once a week, never asked if she needed anything. She gave him a list anyhow, folded once with soap and coffee marked in neat script. He brought back everything but the coffee. It was out, he said. She didn't believe him but said nothing. One day, a neighbor rode up. A woman, wide-hipped and sun-browned, hair in a knot under a brimmed hat. She dismounted without ceremony and clapped dust from her skirt. "You the girl meant for Nathaniel?" she asked, squinting. "I was," she said. "My name is Clara." The woman nodded. "I'm Martha Dorr, live west near the river Split. Samuel's been a fool not to send word sooner. You'll need seed and a proper kettle. I've both." Clara felt a warmth rise that surprised her. "Thank you." "Men don't know what to do with grief," Martha said, glancing toward the barn where Samuel worked. "Especially when it comes in the shape of a woman with nowhere to go." That night, Clara baked cornbread in the old iron pan Martha had left. The smell filled the cabin like something long denied. Samuel ate with quiet hunger, then set his plate down and looked at her for the first time in days. "Don't think this changes things," he said. "I didn't invite you to stay." She met his gaze steady. "No, but you didn't send me away." He didn't answer, but he didn't rise either. Spring bled into early summer. Rain came in long, weeping spells, and the river swelled. One morning the goat gave birth to 2 trembling kids, slick with afterbirth. Clara knelt in the straw, her hands gentle, her breath slow. Samuel watched from the door, arms crossed, as if weighing something unseen. You've done that before, he said. Yes, I worked a dairy east of Emporia for 2 years. You were a widow then. No, she didn't explain. That night, he left a cup of warm water near her cot without a word. Weeks later, after the fourth Sunday, he found her standing barefoot at the edge of the field, skirts lifted just above the mud. The river glinted in the distance, swollen and mean. You don't talk much, he said. Neither do you. He nodded. The air was thick with gnats and damp pine. I don't trust easy. I didn't ask you to. His hand went to his belt again, then dropped. She's buried on the ridge, he said. My wife, Sarah. Clara looked at him, something inside her quieting. I'm sorry. I was gone when she passed, came back late. The fever took her in 2 days. Clara bent, pulled a stalk of milkweed from the edge of the path. You can't be blamed for a storm you weren't in. He gave a dry sound that might have been a laugh. Then he turned and walked back toward the cabin. She followed, her fingers still wrapped around the stem. She would press the leaves later between pages, let them dry. And though he said nothing more that night, he left the lamp burning a little longer than usual. By July, the soil had hardened under the sun, and the river's hiss dulled to a low murmur. The cabin sweltered during the day, holding heat like a punishment, then cooled at night to a chill that sank into the boards. Clara worked with sleeves rolled, hands dark with earth, forearms burned bronze. Her skirts were patched now, and her gloves torn at the fingertips, but the goats were fatter, the hens more regular with their eggs, and the vegetable rows lined straighter each week. Samuel had stopped speaking in single words. He still kept to himself, but on occasion he left her firewood split and stacked before she asked. When she washed the windows, he fixed the loose shutter. When she mended the cracked stair, he watched her work and nodded once, approving. There was no warmth in him, but there was steadiness, and Clara had learned not to mistake one for the other. Mid-month, a man rode up the slope near dusk. His coat was fine-woven, his boots polished. He dismounted with an air of ownership that made Clara's shoulders draw taut. Name, Trask, he said. Heard tell this land passed from one harper to the next. Samuel stepped down from the porch, wiping his hands on his trousers. That's right. Your brother owed me 2 months' cattle feed before he died. I come to collect. Samuel's jaw worked. We don't deal in cattle anymore. Don't much matter, debt's debt. Clara stepped down from the cabin, her voice even. Do you have record of it? Trask turned, surprised. His eyes swept her like she was inventory. And you are. I live here. He smirked, that so. Samuel's voice cut in colder. She's not for your questions. Trask tilted his head. I'll be back with writ, best be ready. He left in a cloud of grit and spit. That night, Samuel drank from the brown jug he kept under the sink. Clara didn't speak. She stirred the pot of beans and let the silence hold. He didn't offer her any, she didn't ask. When she finally sat, she said, He's not bluffing. No. Can you pay it? I won't. She looked at him, brow furrowed. He set the jug down with a thud. Nathaniel made poor deals. Tried to breed what he couldn't feed. I warned him. Clara folded her hands in her lap. But it's your name on the land now. Samuel stared into the corner of the room like something there might change his answer. I buried him. I didn't marry his debts. She stood quietly and took her bowl to the basin. The next morning, she rose early and dressed in her cleanest blouse, worn soft at the collar. She took the buckboard and rode east to the Dorr homestead. Martha met her at the fence. I need a favor, Clara said. Martha didn't ask what kind. She just brought coffee, ink, and a stub of candle wax. They worked at the kitchen table, drafting a letter. By sundown, Clara had posted 3 notices to surrounding farms, offering goat milk, eggs, and stitchwork for trade. She didn't tell Samuel. Over the next 2 weeks, women came. Quiet, serious women with sun-worn hands. They bartered cloth and flour for jars of curdled cream. One brought a pair of shoes for a child who'd outgrown them in a summer. Clara stitched harnesses in exchange for seed. She took to drying herbs, bundling them in twine and hanging them by the window. She sold 4 in town to a woman with a sick husband. The day Trask returned, he found the fence painted, the coop expanded, and $3 set out on the table in an envelope marked Harper Debt. Samuel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, while Trask opened the envelope and sneered. "This all of it." "It's what you'll get," Clara said, standing behind the stove. Trask looked between them, weighed the air. "Next storm that fence falls, don't ask us for timber," he said, spitting into the dirt. Then he turned and mounted, rode off with Dust at his heels. When he was gone, Samuel looked at her. "You went behind my back. I paid what you wouldn't." He stared at her, the muscle in his jaw flicking once, twice. "I didn't ask you to." "No, but you didn't stop me." He left then, walking out into the heat with no hat, no words. That night a storm broke over the ridge. Rain came in hissing sheets, and the wind howled low like a beast denied. The roof groaned but held. Clara lay on her cot, listening to the rain on tin and the goats bleating in the barn. She thought of Trask's eyes, of Martha's blunt kindness, of Samuel standing with his mouth drawn tight like a man unlearning how to speak. In the darkness, a knock came. Samuel's voice low, "You awake?" She sat up, "Yes." The door opened. He stood there, hat in hand, soaked through, steam rising off his coat. "I fixed the roof," he said, "but I think it'll hold better if you sleep inside the main room. Cot, too near the east wall." She blinked. "All right," she said. He stepped aside. She moved her bedding into the center, near the stove. He didn't watch her. He only nodded once, then turned back to the shadows. He left the door between them ajar that night. And in the soft dark, for the first time since arriving, Clara dreamed without waking. By early August, the air had thickened with the slow ache of summer. The trees whispered less in the heat, and the animals moved with caution. Bees clung drunk to the squash blossoms, and even the creek behind the ridge had thinned to a lazy trickle. Inside the cabin, time stretched and shrank according to the light. Samuel rose each day with a stiffness Clara had learned not to comment on. He winced when the weather changed, favored his right hip more now. But he still carried the water, still mended the fence when a post came loose in the wind. Clara patched his shirt sleeves without being asked, her stitches tight and near invisible. One morning she found him sitting on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, a folded paper in his hand. The light hadn't yet broken full over the ridge. She approached without sound. He looked up once, then held out the letter. "From Nebraska," he said. "A cousin I haven't seen in 8 years, wants to buy the land." "All of it." She took the letter slowly, her eyes scanning the blocky handwriting. "Will you sell?" He ran a hand over his beard. "Don't know, might, no heirs, no sense in leaving Dust behind." Clara folded the letter and gave it back. "Would I be expected to go?" He looked at her long. "You're not tied to this place, nor to me." "I know." But she didn't offer more, and neither did he. Later that week, Martha returned with a bundle of linens and her daughter, Ruth, a girl of 10 with a quick laugh and a limp from a childhood fever. They stayed for 2 days. Clara taught Ruth to braid hair and showed her how to separate cream. Samuel, to everyone's surprise, carved the girl a whistle from a branch of chokecherry. The second evening, after Ruth fell asleep near the stove with her head in her mother's lap, Martha glanced up and said, "Place looks different." Samuel nodded but didn't speak. "You look different," she added. He stood awkward. "I'll see to the barn." When he left, Martha turned to Clara. "You staying for good?" Clara hesitated. "I haven't been asked." Martha's mouth lifted at the corner. "Doesn't mean you're not wanted." That night after the guests were asleep, Clara stepped outside. The stars hung low, heavy as fruit. Samuel sat on the porch again, shirt open at the collar, hands slack. He didn't speak when she sat beside him. After a long while she said, "What was she like, Sarah?" He didn't look at her. "Bright. Laughed too much. Liked to keep bees. She made the honey we lived on for years." Clara traced the grain of the step with one finger. "She died in spring." He nodded. "April. Everything was blooming." Didn't seem fair. Silence wrapped around them close as smoke. Then he said, so soft she almost missed it, "I used to come out here after she passed. Couldn't sleep. Same stars, but they looked colder." Clara glanced sideways. "And now? They don't look cold tonight." The next morning, Ruth left behind a small sketch she'd made with a charred stick, Clara holding a goat, Samuel nearby with a crooked hat. The child's rendering was crude, but something in it pierced deeper than fine words. Clara folded the drawing and tucked it into her psalms. As August faded, the nights grew shorter again. Samuel didn't mention the letter from Nebraska again. The envelope disappeared from the table. One evening, while boiling water for preserves, Clara said without looking up, "Would you let me buy half the land?" Samuel glanced over from the workbench, where he was oiling a yoke. "You'd stay, then. If I could make something mine." He stood for a long time, not moving. "You've earned more than half," he said, "but if it's the deed that steadies you, we'll write it." Later that week, they rode to town together. Clara wore her boots polished and her hair in a fresh braid. At the notary's desk, Samuel signed without hesitation. When the pen passed to her, her fingers shook just slightly. Afterward, outside the office, he said, "I'll plant the winter rye where the east field runs thin." She nodded. "I'll barter for flannel and tallow. It'll be a hard season." He looked at her then, really looked. "You speak like someone who plans to stay." "I do." He touched the brim of his hat but didn't smile. "Then we'll make ready." And for the first time, the word we didn't feel like borrowed language, but something born fresh, like the first scent of frost when summer starts to loosen its grip. Autumn came with a hush, leaves crisp to gold, then rust, the air gathering edge. The goats grew thicker coats and the hens laying slowed. Each evening Clara lit a taper by the window and watched the light move across the room, softening the hard lines of wood and stone. The cabin felt less hollow now. A second chair had been added beside the stove, and their meals stretched longer into the evenings. Not in talk, Samuel still kept his words guarded, but in presence, in the quiet rhythm of passing salt, of one waiting for the other to finish chewing before rising to clear the plates. They worked the land like partners. Clara oversaw the drying racks, lined with slices of apple and squash. Samuel cut firewood in longer hours than his body allowed. She caught him favoring his hip too often and said nothing until the day he collapsed beside the stump, breath shallow, sweat slicking his brow. She hauled him upright without ceremony, wrapped an arm around his back. "You're not 20, she said. "I never was." She helped him to the porch and sat him in the shade, fetched water and a rag. When she returned, he was staring at the field, his eyes unreadable. "I don't like being seen that way." "You mean human." He looked at her then. "No. I mean broken." She knelt before him, the rag damp in her hand. "You're not broken," she said. "You're just worn." That night he did not retreat to his narrow bed, but sat with her until the fire burned low. She read aloud from the Psalms. He didn't stop her. Later, when they both stood to go, he paused. His hand hovered near her arm, not touching, not quite. "I never asked what brought you to take a male husband." Clara's breath stilled. "There was a man," he drank. "After my father died, he saw fit to keep the house his way. I left under a false name. The paper I answered was a chance to live under no one's shadow." She didn't look at him, but she felt his listening. "I never meant to marry for love," she said, "only for peace." When he didn't speak, she turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "You've brought more than peace here." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his sleeve as she passed, and he did not flinch. The first snow came thin and early. It dusted the ridge, laced the barn roof in white. Clara rose before the sun and found frost along the inside window glass. She held her hand against it until the shape of her palm faded. They worked slower now, with shorter days. Samuel limped more openly. Clara spun wool by lamplight and stitched a heavy quilt from worn shirts and flour sacks. One afternoon, while gutting squash, Clara paused. "I'd like to build a root cellar." Samuel, sharpening a blade nearby, looked up. "We can." "We'll need help." He nodded. "I'll ask at doors. They owe me for fence timber." The day the men came, Clara directed them with quiet authority. She marked the space beneath the hill, showed where the stairs should cut, where runoff would pool. The men glanced to Samuel, but he only nodded. "She's the one knows how," he said. By evening, her hands were blistered, her boots soaked. As she leaned back against the slope, Watching the last of the light turn red on the pines, Samuel came to stand beside her. "You know," he said, "Nathaniel never would have built this." She turned to him. "Why?" "Didn't think long term. He lived season to season." "And you?" "I didn't live at all." They stood there a moment longer, dusk thickening around them. Then, gently, she said, "You're not the only one learning." That night she found her cot gone. In its place stood a second narrow bed, opposite his, made with care, 2 blankets folded. He said nothing about it, but when she slipped beneath the quilt, he left the lamp burning long past the hour it was needed. And though the wind pressed hard against the windows, the room felt still, like the inside of a prayer. Winter came hard that year. The wind rolled in off the ridges like a fist and settled deep in the marrow of things. Snow banked against the door, and the goats huddled silent in the barn. Clara boiled fat and lye to make soap, her fingers raw from cold. Samuel spent long hours inside, mending gear, smoothing leather with oil that smelled faintly of pine. The world narrowed to the space between walls. Time no longer ran by light, but by tasks. Boiling, stitching, feeding, fetching. Some days they spoke only in gestures, nods, glances. Other days they traded words that curled warm in the air, simple things. "Pass the salt, your fire's low, I'll fetch more wood," that grew into more. By mid-January, a cough had settled in Samuel's chest, low and persistent. Clara mixed herbs, steeped tea, laid her hand to his forehead with a nurse's detachment. He did not argue. He only sat beside the stove, blanket drawn over his knees, eyes closed like someone trying to remember how to breathe. One night, when his cough had eased but the fever hadn't fully broken, she knelt to change the basin. He opened his eyes, bloodshot and tired. "I wasn't ready when Nathaniel died," he said. She paused. "No one ever is. He wrote me, you know, after you agreed to come. Said he finally figured what kind of woman it took to make a place a home." Clara set the basin aside. "I didn't come to build a home," she said. "I know." She hesitated, "But I stayed." His voice dropped, rough with honesty. "And you made one anyhow." She reached for the cloth, wrung it with steady hands. "It's not finished. Nothing worth keeping ever is." That night the storm outside tore down a limb from the cedar tree. Clara heard it fall in the dark, but did not rise. Samuel's breathing was slow, steady. She lay back beneath the quilt and let sleep come. When the thaw began in March, it came in stages, the ice on the eaves melting in soft ticks, the river groaning back to life. Mud replaced snow, wind shifted. Birds returned in cautious flocks. The root cellar held. The hens began laying again. A neighbor's mare birthed twins. Clara moved through each day with sleeves rolled high and boots thick with clay. Her hands were strong now, her hair always tied back in a way that spoke of purpose. There was no fragility left in her. One evening, while cleaning the goat pen, she heard footsteps in the straw. She turned. Samuel stood there, coat unfastened, a small bundle in hand. He held it out to her. "What is it?" He cleared his throat. "Belonged to Sarah, thought maybe you'd want it or not." She took the bundle, opened the cloth. Inside was a small copper brooch, simple and worn, its clasp bent. "I don't need to wear another woman's things." "It isn't about need." She turned it over once, then tucked it into her coat pocket. "I'll keep it for her memory." He nodded. "And what of yours?" she asked. His voice was low. "I've never had one kept before." The next day, they rode to town together to file a new deed. Half the land listed under Clara's name, but now amended, both names joined, without hyphen or hesitation. No ceremony, no ring, just ink and agreement and the space between 2 signatures. Later, in the quiet of the cabin, she lit a lamp and found him by the fire. She sat beside him, holding a bowl of stew between her hands. "We never asked what we were," she said. He didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, "Maybe not husband and wife, not the way folks reckon it." She nodded, but something steadier. Something built. She offered him the spoon. He took it, fingers brushing hers. Outside, the wind moved low through the trees, no longer bitter, just present. The land slept and stirred. The future waited, unnamed but near. And in the warmth of the room they had shaped, plank by plank, word by word. They sat together, not out of obligation, not from accident, but because they had chosen, slowly, quietly, to belong.